all for coming here tonight. We come together tonight during a time of unbearable horror for the Palestinian people. Over the past 2 years, we've witnessed unimaginable violence, starvation, displacement, and mass killing. Not as a side effect of war, but as a deliberate policy. What's happening in Gaza is a genocide, and yet many of those in power look away. Tonight we will challenge that silence. It's about naming the role our media plays, not just in distorting the truth, but in manufacturing consent for the unthinkable. Beside us here tonight, you'll see a striking sculpture by Andreas König, a spoon, and this represents the deliberate starvation of Palestinians in Gaza, but it also symbolises the media narratives we are spoon-fed. Half-truths, omissions, distortions and distractions, designed to justify the unjustifiable. That spoon haunts us all, and it should. We're so grateful to have this space, and I want to thank Susan Heffernan and all at Ballina Fringe Festival for supporting us and for providing this beautiful venue. I also want to thank the Kennedy Glasgow House, and especially Derek, where he is, who has this place literally shining for us tonight. I want to give a huge thank you as well to Stephen Clark and everybody at the Great National Hotel Ballina, who very generously supported this event by providing accommodation for some of our guests. And that was a true act of solidarity. I said I would really, they didn't ask even to be mentioned, but I said I wanted to. And I want to thank everyone here who helped us bring this night together tonight. Anybody who made dinners, offered gifts, tidied beds, moved chairs, lent us equipment, organised the tech side of this, put up posters, made phone calls, spammed social media, and everybody who came here tonight. And this is a true community, and we're very proud to be a part of it. Now, I want to tell a little bit about our wonderful speakers. Without whom tonight really could not happen. We are deeply honoured to have been working with two extraordinary journalists from Gaza in preparing this event. Unfortunately, Abu Bakr Abed, who was due to join us tonight, has had to step back due to unforeseen circumstances. Abu Bakr was forced to flee the genocide in Gaza and has continued to report with courage, dignity and unflinching honesty. We hold him, his family and all those still enjoying this horror in our thoughts tonight. But we are incredibly blessed to be joined here in person by Eman Mohammed, an internationally acclaimed photojournalist and the first woman to document Gaza from within. Her work has appeared in the world's leading outlets and has shaped how millions see Palestine, not through headlines but through the eyes of its people. Eman's presence here tonight is a profound privilege. Her images speak truth to power and bear witness to humanity in the darkest of times. We're also joined by two vital Irish voices. Tony Groves, podcaster and political commentator, who has used his platform to challenge those narratives and elevate unheard truths, including those coming out of Palestine. And Audrey Kissane, journalist and editor, whose work consistently exposes failures and biases in Irish media coverage of global injustice, particularly when it comes to Palestine. You might have seen on the way in tonight a few donation buckets around the place. If you'd like to support our work in Mayo IPSC, you'll be welcome to contribute either in cash or via Revolut, and that just helps us keep our work going. Honestly, there's no money made out of this, I can promise you. And I finally want to tell you how tonight will run. So we'll begin in a moment with a short video that lays bare how Irish media helps shape public perception and how that creates an environment in which genocide is seen as acceptable. Then we'll hear from each of our speakers in turn, and finally at the end we'll open the floor to your questions in a Q&A with the full panel. So I want to thank you again for coming, thank you for listening, and thank you for refusing to look away. Free Palestine.
The question of genocide, and you've mentioned that, and of course there's a case being taken in the International Court of Justice by South Africa against Israel for that. And they reject that totally. They say it's abusing the term genocide against the people that it actually was carried about. And the ambassador, when she was talking to us, referring to the Holocaust. When those two comparisons come up, how do you feel? From land that they had occupied. So, you can start the blame game wherever you are, but the current conflict, it started as a result of the events of October 7th. Now, how did you feel when you saw those events unfold? Because with your experience, you must have known that the Israelis would react perhaps not as harshly and as fiercely as they have now, but you must have despaired that what was going to rain down upon your fellow citizens in Gaza.
But the majority of the Palestinians, they support peace, and we signed about it, and we were committed about it.
And obviously ordinary Palestinians who had nothing to do with the firing of rockets at Israel, nothing to do with the incursion on October the 7th and the kidnapping of hostages and the killing of more than 1,000 people, ordinary Palestinians did not do that. So going back to my question about how you felt what would happen, because the affront to Israel was enormous, and I compared it to if 800 people in the Republic of Ireland were massacred in one day and a number of our citizens were kidnapped. I know how feeling would be running high in this country, and I'm sure you understood how feeling would run high in Israel. But did you fear for what has now unfolded, that the retribution from Israel would be disproportionate and huge?
As Nasser Hospital, where Hamdi and Adam are inpatient at the moment, that hospital has been targeted countless times.
And Dr. Hadi, when you mentioned, and I'm going to, with your permission, take a break in a few minutes and ask you to stay with us, but I feel that you're getting, even within this sense of this interview, stronger and stronger, and it's the most powerful contribution. But when you said the word hostage, a lot of people will immediately go back to October the 7th, 2023, and the hostages that Hamas took.
Israel is preventing journalists, foreign presence, foreign officers, human rights monitors from entering. So, this is the unlawfulness that we need to discuss, Gavin.
On the International Court of Justice, they're currently hearing a case brought by South Africa that accuses Israel of committing genocide, which you mentioned earlier, and Ireland has joined that case.
Yes.
According to Israel has denied genocide, and according to the American Jewish Committee, Israel is not committing genocide. Their argument is that that's the destruction of any national, racial, ethnic or religious group that Israel says it's seeking the destruction of Hamas, a terror group that states its intent to destroy the State of Israel in its founding charter, and that Israel's campaign in Gaza is an act of self-defense. I simply put you that as the counterpoint.
Yeah, Gavin, but why do you quote the American Jewish Association? Why don't you quote the Israeli scholars, expert on genocide like Omar?
All right, that's fair. Lastly, you said that you don't support the killing of innocents and women and children. I spoke to a representative of Hamas on the show on Friday of last week, who said that the attack on October 7th, that's, I suppose, spawned this round of fighting between Israel and Gaza, that it was entirely justified because Israel is an occupying force. Would you agree with that?
I mean, this what happened, and the response of Israelis to the 7th of October, it wasn't 7th of October only. It's brought like more than...
No, I accept, and I think many people would think it is entirely disproportionate, the Israeli response. But the justification of the October 7th attack, do you agree with that?
Like, listen, there is no justification for what Israel did since...
No, but I'm asking about the attack on October 7th, Ambassador.
I mean, listen. I say that. I mean, the justification is that Israel continue its occupation to Palestine for 7 decades, continue with the oppression. It's not only in Gaza, in the West Bank, annexation, the land of the Palestinians. We, the Palestinians, have the right to self-determination. We have the right to defend ourselves. We have the right as well to be free. I mean, this is a right that was protected by the international.
Yeah, no, and I accept entirely all of that. By the way, I genuinely do. I'm just asking specifically about the October 7th attack, where women were raped and families were burnt. Is that justified?
Listen, I mean, there was yesterday a release.
And Audrey, you were saying that you've got, and rightly so, a very compassionate welcome here in Ireland. But does anyone, I know your attack happened in July 24, but does anyone say to you, well, what about October the 7th, 2023 and the Hamas attack? Well, what about October the 7th? Well, what about October the 7th? Well, what about October the 7th?
Eman Mohammed's life and work blur the line between witness and resistance. Born in Saudi Arabia but educated and rooted in Gaza City, she began making history at just age 19, when she became the first female photojournalist operating from within the Gaza Strip. Her early career was shaped by relentless war. Within weeks of starting, conflict struck. Despite cultural barriers, sexism, harassment, and repeated threats, she persisted. She's spoken openly about how editors refused to believe a Palestinian woman could have taken certain photos, and she fought to reclaim credit for her work. Eman is also a senior TED Fellow and award-winning visual journalist, whose images have appeared worldwide, capturing the human side of the siege, of loss, of dignity under fire. Her mission is to bear witness, not as a tourist, but as someone who lives every frame that she shoots. I give you Eman.
Peace be upon you. I'm very honored to be here. I'm always happy when I'm around. I see you looking in the back. I'm too short, am I? I'm just going to stand. I'm always happy whenever I'm around Irish people, and there's a reason for that. You're special, but it's still. I spent the past 10 years in exile in the United States. I never thought of living in Gaza. I loved being in Gaza. I loved living in Gaza.
Just hold it closer to your mouth.
Is it in your mouth? Go again. I still believe that I just lived. I started my career early. I was still in university when I started working, and I love that because in Gaza it's such a difficult environment for journalists, as you can see, because they often become the target, and not because of their politics, and not because of the propaganda that the Israeli regime pumps on their channels, so lazy and so pathetic. But it's because we tell you what's happening. We're your eyes when it goes totally dark and total blackouts in Gaza. And it struck me early on that even though I was a woman, a photojournalist, and it wasn't something popular or common within Gaza just yet, and now we have so many amazing photojournalists and journalists women journalists and photojournalists. But back then, the biggest obstacle for me was to audition in front of Western media, to prove that I'm worthy, that I'm one of the good ones. They wouldn't give me the time of the day if I didn't choose sides. Are you with or against? And the way I grew up, I lived my childhood and was raised in a convent school, in a Catholic school. And so I loved seeing different layers of my community, the Christian Palestinians and the Muslim Palestinians, and how they were united together with their love for traditions, even if it didn't make sense at times. We were all on the same page all the time, and the bond was so strong. And I love the idea of feeling safe within my community, even when my community itself did not feel necessarily safe. There was this tribe that was often created in our neighborhoods that would love you, nourish you, and take care of you no matter what, which I'm sure you know, and you can differentiate between big cities and your own neighborhoods in that way, because it's just something that I can't explain in words. It's just this cozy love, like a big hug, when you see your neighbors who are so noisy and so into your business, but then you just find home within them. You tolerate them sometimes, but you so knowingly love them. And I felt the exact same way. And I had such an upbringing that made me feel like I gained a lot of privilege through my mom's perception of things. She was a single mom, and she navigated so many different things within the society, within the community, that opened my eyes to how big our world is, even under siege, even under bombing, even under occupation. I lived in an apartment building that was occupied for more than a decade. So we lived on the 3rd floor, and the Israeli soldiers lived on the 9th, or occupied the 9th and the 10th floor. And that was my first understanding of what occupation really means. We celebrated Christmas on a regular basis. And so I hated the question like, oh, do you do that in the desert? And I'm like, sure, beach city, please get it right. Our city is a beach city. And yes, we celebrated Christmas, and he gave presents to Muslim kids and Christian kids, all of it. There was no discrimination among us, because we're just a small community, and if we turn on each other, we knew it's not going to be so long for us all to perish. And so our survival depended on loving each other and belonging to the land. Not out of ownership, not out of this belongs to me, but I belong to this. And that resonates with me so much when I'm around the Irish people. I know that Irish people have been subjected to genocide. I know that they survived. I know that 1 million and more got killed. And forced starvation was weaponized against you, like it often got weaponized against us in Gaza as well. And it seemed like it's always difficult for the world, the Western world specifically, to explain to them what it means to be under siege, that we have a list every summer and every month at times that changes. So on that list there are items that are banned by Israel because it's a security threat. That would include crayons, wedding dresses, insulin, soccer balls, which we call football, thank God, and among them other things that wouldn't make any sense. So one summer we didn't have ice cream and cleaning supplies. We were meant to be often felt like less than. It was dehumanization as a system. It was not just simple retaliation, and it's not like that is better. However, it was just to make you constantly feel that if you stay in your hometown, if you stay in Gaza, you're going to be treated less than. And so I wanted the world to know about all of that. I wanted to document that. And I was given the opportunity to do that because I was so passionate towards photography, thanks to my mom. She often took photos in a camera with a film, and we weren't super rich, so we couldn't develop the film most of the time, but we enjoyed looking at the negatives and seeing what could have been the photo. And having digital cameras at the time when I was starting my career offered me this amazing opportunity to just visualize everything that I was seeing. And I didn't just want to tell people stories. I was not know-it-all. I wanted to know the stories to begin with, of my own community, like to dig deeper. And I feel like you know, as locals of the community, that you keep digging and the land is just so rich. More stories, more things are going to come to the surface. I'm sure you feel that the same way I felt it. So I'm going to show you some of the photos that I documented in Gaza, and I'm going to tell you some of it behind the scenes, not all. And we can go from there. Just 1 second. So this photo is one of my favorites, and I have a lot of favorites. Thank God they're not my kids, but it just encapsulated everything that I've seen in Gaza. How women, men, children, everyone found their refuge in the sea. The sea was like a lifeline for a lot of us. And I can't tell you how many massacres were committed by the Israeli Navy at the beach. And often, every time that it happens, I would say to my mom, like, this is it. We're not going to go to the beach anymore. It's not going to be as enjoyable. We're always going to think of the blood or how they were enjoying their last meal. And it's all the similar things. When the Israeli army struck Abu Ghalia family, which was a family just enjoying a picnic in daylight. And they killed everyone but Huda Ghalia, the daughter who was 9 years old. And my memory does not say me to remember the date, but that was probably in early 2000s. And the child was left alone to scream again and again and again for her father, who at that point was instantly killed. And that was so stuck in our memory. I went into deeper depression because literally the beach was everything that meant freedom for us. And I remember my mom drove around sunset the next day to the beach to show me that it's not going to be such a bad thing, to try to limit the trauma that we're all being subjected to collectively. And I remember just looking at the beach, and the beach was full. People were in so defiance. They didn't forget about the blood. They didn't forget about the suffering. However, this is what we belong to. This is our outlook to what the world looks like on the outside. You would look at the horizon, and you would look at the beach, and you would look at the ships, and you can imagine how it would be if our land was free. And so I've often took a lot of photos of the beach, and it often, and this is a chill day. This is an easy day. This is a day where not everyone is going to work, let's say. And it just encapsulated everything that he loved and everything that he lived at the same time. Another attempt to traumatize people in Gaza was when Abu Bakr children were killed. 3 children who were playing soccer, and I think you all saw the footage because it just happened in both instances that I described, that the photographer would be literally there or moments away. 3 children were playing soccer and they were struck by the Navy. There's no way that you can mistake a child to an adult. Not at that age, not at 8 or 9, they weren't even 15. Like, there's no way to justify it. But again, colonizers and settlers don't look for things to justify. Bloody Sunday was not justifiable, and it still happened. And I know that during these days, the trial is happening for one person, as if one person opened the fire. So the element of not achieving justice and traumatizing the people had always been a weapon that is used against any oppressed people, any people who are being subjected to oppression. We had a lot of stories about women and girls that were within the community that many of them I was not aware of. And as a woman photojournalist, I dealt with obstacles to be in the field, but at the same time that came with a plus. I had access to things that a lot of my male colleagues did not have access to. I could easily enter homes of women in conservative societies and be able to speak with them, be able to hear their stories and get to the depth of it. Not just the surface behind the headline. So this is Sabah Abu Ghnaim. In here, she's 14 years old, and she just was so passionate about surfing. This board took 9 months of 3 international organizations trying to negotiate with the Israeli army that's not a security threat. And that's one of the rare cases where Sabah had her father who was a lifeguard, and he also had such passion for the sea and riding into the waves, and he was the one who took it upon himself to nourish her love to surfing. And it was a success. It was an absolute success to get her that wetsuit and to get her that board. And until this moment, we are in touch. Sabah is still alive, thank God, and her family have been displaced to the south. This is one of the times that I realized how powerful photos can be, how much of forensic evidence they can be, and even with the frustration that we have within the international society and the UN and their inability to force or enforce all the laws that have been preached upon us and honestly been designated to protect the killer disguised as executioner. And it's always been possible to apply with brown and black people, but that never been the case with white people. And by white, I mean white colonizers, those who decide that colonization is formidable if the land was rich and giving. And that's something I struggle with while living here, and I've been here for a year only. Because during the so-called famine, Ireland was rich with a lot. And all of that was being funneled out, was being exported to Britain and other countries controlled by Britain. However, none of it was coming back to the people, and they were authentically starved to death. And then this narrative, this false narrative, kept being repeated again and again and again, that the famine, that right now we all say the famine, as if it was not avoidable, as if it was a humanitarian crisis, which I'm sure you hear that term plenty in Gaza. Something that where we mute the killer. We don't say who caused it. We don't say that it was caused. It can be God's will. It's just happened, and we couldn't have stopped it. And that's where Palestinians are now. So before October 7th, Palestinian stories didn't get any coverage. A broken window in Tel Rabia, occupied Tel Rabia, which is known as Tel Aviv, can get more coverage than 10,000 getting slaughtered in Gaza. However, when now we get some spotlight, we get some headlines in the news, it's often unknown. 10 kids died. They just had a heart attack. So conveniently together, you will see the gymnastics of the language going back and forth. And I'm not a native speaker, but when I look at it, I'm like, that's a lot of words to not say genocide. That's a lot of words to not say who killed who. You can name Palestinians, you can name what happened, but you can never name why or where or how it happened. And that's not journalism, that's propaganda. Anytime you see the headline saying Israel said, we would never dare say Hitler said, the Nazis said, but they dare to say Britain said about the Irish. And so if you see it, I'm only giving you this as an example because it's so easy to dictate and make it a policy rather than just a mistake once or twice. And anytime those good stories happen, we hate them because they make our killing so impossible. It's so possible. If they make our killing just something that is sad, but never name who caused that sadness. And that never served us, and it will never do. Just like when all these items that I just listed early on were banned from Gaza, no one ever asked why was it banned. It wasn't until American officials were coming on a tour to Gaza, and they noticed that there were trucks and trucks. Sorry, did I say Irish or did I say American? Oh, okay, bear with me. And they were noticing trucks and trucks of aid, and they were all stacked with pasta. And they were like, why is pasta at borders? And the Israelis responded, because it's a security threat. And they were like, that's bullshit, because it is. And so, for the first time in maybe 3 years, we saw pasta again. And this is part of the dehumanization. I'm sure your ancestors, if they were among us, they would tell you stories and stories that have been buried about the methods, the evil methods, at length at which they were oppressed by. The first and last would be not calling it a genocide. I often get approached by Irish people who ask me, like, how can we help? And my answer keeps getting repeated as the same. You can't help us to be liberated. You can't help us to see freedom again till you do. And we do by admitting what happened to us, what had been inflicted on us. That's the bare minimum. We're not even talking about reparations. And the colonizers are so smart in their way of inflicting pain, then camouflage it as not our fault, and later on, don't you dare ask for reparations. What did Ireland get from the British occupation after 800 years? Can we name just one thing that they did in redemption? Apologies, those are cheap. And we're seeing them with Palestinians, and our people are remaining dead because of apologies. So the photo that you just saw was for White Phosphor, and White Phosphor was, Gaza was hit with it in 2008, 2009, and the Israeli army automatically denied that it ever happened. So these photos became so invaluable because they were admitted into ICC and ICJ investigations that went nowhere. However, we still had the receipts. We still were able to say, you cannot deny what our eyes can see, which is literally what the whole world is seeing here. The next photo is for a family in the north where I was covering, this was during winter. Palestinians in Gaza had no power, no electricity per day, but for 4 hours, if you get that. It's like a schedule that passes, and each and every neighborhood can get 4 hours. Can you imagine for a second, what would you do with 4 hours of electricity? Would you plug your phone? Would you heat the water to take a bath? Would you make a cup of tea? What would you do? What would you not do? Can you think all the electronics that operate only and solely on electricity? And then Palestinians were living in Stone Age again and again. Not to mention all the airstrikes that cause damage, and we need to fix that without any concrete or wood or any essential construction materials. So this was up in the north, where the north is the closest to the buffer zone, what's called the buffer zone, and people were actually really struggling. So you hear that now about children freezing to death. That has always been happening. That has always been happening, and since before 2005. So in 2005, Israel decided to hit the electricity grid in Gaza and make us completely reliant on them supplying us with electricity. This is for the underground tunnel, which I think should be one of the most popular topics that Western media is talking about, because Western media covered at length. I remember the first and second and third encounter with Western editors that I worked with and sent photographers into Gaza to document this story. It was an award-winning story because they got to see what it means to create an entire underground world. We had food, snacks, McDonald's and KFC smuggled through the tunnels before the boycott. So anything you see was before the boycott. So here we have a young man digging the tunnels, and one of the tunnels, and these tunnels were 20 to 30 meters deep. The ones that would go 40 to 50 meters deep would be for heavier things like construction material and cars at times. Where it came to the most touching, the most sensitive part was when tunnels became a way to reunite families. You have no idea how many families have been separated by the occupation, because my family, for a start, my husband is Irish American, my kids have American passports, and I have a Palestinian ID. Now I have an American passport that I'm looking forward to burn, but that's the other thing. We can't exist in Gaza as a family. It would be either me with my husband and kids outside, or me inside Gaza with my kids but without my husband. And it has degrees, so my kids, as long as they are not 16, they can come with me to Gaza. Once they are 16, they can't live with their mom in Gaza. There's nothing more cruel than separating family, and we can talk about that for days of how traumatic it had been, how many marriages had been broken because of it, because that's when you test really how human beings, how much torture can you take? How many years can you be away from your kids? How many years can you be away from your partners, or your moms, or your dads? I can't imagine one. And it costs you dearly when you are living in Gaza. So these tunnels have been covered heavily. However, when October 7th happened, we didn't hear a peep about why these tunnels were there to begin with. When did they start? Everyone was surprised in Western media, mainstream media, legacy media. They were like, what? Tunnels? No, not us. If you just make a very easy, quick Google search and type Reuters, AFP, WFP, any organization, any international one, UN or not, news agency or not, you will find very lengthy coverage of the tunnels, because they were more than a lifeline. They broke the siege for the period of maybe 2 years for Palestinians. I had a colic baby. Anyone knows what that is? They're fun. That's when you're like, I don't know, do I need that baby in my life? And my kid, I feel like she was part-time punishment, because she knew when to cry, and that was all day, all night long. And she needed a specific formula. And getting that, it was like gold milk. We couldn't find it anywhere in Gaza. The Israeli military has a very unique way of torturing Palestinians in Gaza to not boycott. So if you want to, as you know now, all the GHF aid centers are obligated, not that they need to obligate them, but they are obligated to only resource aid from Israeli province. Because the apartheid state is crumbling so much because of the boycott. So think of that every time that you go to the supermarket and not get your phones out and scan. Because if it was so worthless, they wouldn't force starving people to have their products. It's that, their economy is that broken. For a year, we've been saying that all the startups have 6 months in Israel to announce full bankruptcy. So the BDS movement is moving, and it's moving fast. It's not moving fast enough, but it's moving fast. One of the issues that was in 2012, to get that milk is just impossible. They would get us specific milk that was Israeli, and it was insanely expensive, and it was not designated for babies with that kind of condition. So I drove to the tunnels myself every week to get her 2 boxes of this specific milk. And that's just like one way to explain to you how vital those underground tunnels were. Now, the tunnels that are used by Hamas for transparency, it's not the same tunnels that have been used for food, because those are easy to detect. This is how the tunnels look from the outside. There's no way any drone, any helicopter, any Israeli or not, that cannot stop them. They were just for the eyes to see, and they were mainly in Rafah, which is between Egypt and Palestine, because that's where we got all our alternatives. That's where we got all the, that's where we got that KFC, and it was literally from Egyptian Rafah, which is Egyptian Rafah and Palestinian Rafah are split with a border. Palestinians are not heroes, and they did not survive. They endured. And I would like us all to just pay attention to the language we use about them, because we're not all angels. I can name 3 uncles that are really a piece of work. And we're not all generous. We're not all loving. We're not all honest. We're not all perfect. And we gossip. And we have issues. A lot of issues. And sometimes we self-medicate. And sometimes we don't talk about our trauma. And sometimes we can't cry. And sometimes we tell each other that you shouldn't cry. And sometimes we play little of big things that you should grieve for months and months, if not years. And that's our coping mechanism. Because if you cry, there is no time for us to pick you up. And if you collapse, then someone else is going to collapse, and someone else is going to collapse. I know that all my colleagues who were able to evacuate outside of Gaza kept it a secret for months and months, out of guilt, out of shame, out of not being able to save everyone else. And beyond that, we're just humans, really. We're not supposed to endure forced starvation and come out on the other side amazing and glowing. We're not supposed to be dealing with our trauma all in a very healthy, productive way. Some of us are abusers. Some of us are abused. And some of us can tell jokes, and some of us can tell lies. And eventually, we're not always on the same page. And thinking of Palestinians as those heroic figures that are godly and so admired all the time only plays into the Israeli propaganda. Because the moment they tell you about our flaws as a community, like any community, when it comes to the LGBT, when it comes to women, when it comes to parts of the education, you will see us as demons, because you often saw us as angels. So, it's the same way that they talk about the Irish. It's the same way that they portray the Irish. And it's the same way that it played into their narrative. Like, look at you, you're just stumbling from here to there. And as if you had to be fireworks and all happiness and giggles after an entire genocide had been committed here. The land still suffers. The actual land, the soil, where crops grow, is still suffering. How could human be healed when nobody offered them any kind of or way to help? So what we're seeing now, whether it's the pink washing, whether it's how they are all Muslims, there are no Palestinian Christians, and then you see the videos of Palestinian Christians being spat on. And Israeli ministers coming out and saying, yes, this is a Jewish tradition to spit on the cross. And the more you spit, the more you're going to be like lifted up. And we see that and we ignore it because we've already been, all that we're seeing, everything that you heard about the Irish media, I hate to think that the Irish media consists of actually real Irish people. They embody nothing of the Irish. But they drank the Kool-Aid of they're Muslims, terrorists, brown, black. We're not. We've never been down at the pyramid. We've never been discriminated against. I have a lot to say about Irish Americans. I'm married to them. And so we have the cards, and we know that trauma can do that. It absolutely can do that. Till this moment, if we can't say the word genocide about what happened to the Irish, then what the hell are we doing? that right to yourselves, you can give that right to me. And I can only lean on allies who are capable. Because honestly, we have no time to waste. We've lost too many. And my heart can't take losing one more. And for that to happen, we need to be able, within ourselves, to be honest and tell ourselves the truth. In this photo, Palestinian children, who are so not spoiled, however, whenever they come up with a genius idea, we say yes. So they decided that they want to do something to get them into Guinness record. We're like, okay, we can't make big pies or big food or shawarma or whatever because we don't have enough. What can we do? And if you go to any part of our beach and you carry like a ready-made kite, you would be shamed. Like I highly advise to make your own, even if it looks clumsy. So each and every child has to make their own kite, and they were like, we want to fly kites. So UNRWA made this happen. It was a big event in 2011, actually 2009, sorry. And they gathered at the beach where each child brought their handmade kite to fly them together at the same time. They did, they failed, they came again, and they actually entered Guinness record for the kids who flew the highest number of kites. And that happened over 2 tries. However, the first time, they didn't just fail, it was deliberate. The Guinness record had to monitor the way that kites fly, so don't quote me on this, in a specific way that the Israeli army deemed security threat. Another thing that we don't talk about nearly as enough. Sorry, am I eating time? That was always the blood. When the genocide started after October 7th, the market in Europe, strawberries and flowers, got heavily affected. Strawberries and flowers became much more expensive. And that's because Gaza, as a concentration camp, had been fueling the market in Europe with flowers and strawberries. And that's literally some of the things that it costs you nothing. It doesn't mean that you're standing with Palestinians or against Palestinians. You just state the fact. Have you ever heard of this story? No. You might have not even noticed that the rise might not hit Ireland to begin with. But that was one of the things that were so jarring. How much there's reliance on Palestinians to produce. But then when they are affected, there's no aid, there's no help, there's no attention, there's no truth to be told. This was one of the Qassam trainings that I was able to document. And it blew my mind that day. We were in Khan Yunis in the south with literally drones hovering around us. But I don't think I've ever felt more safe. And that was not, I've always held the position of opposition, and that means that I wasn't in agreement with the government. However, there was always a difference between the government of Hamas and Al-Qassam, which is the militant brigade of Hamas. And it's a distinction that hadn't been made clear enough in media. And that's not to say that the Qassam are angels or the government are angels, but they are 2 different entities. Hamas had their spiritual leader, Ahmed Yassin, who was on a wheelchair. Many of you might remember him. He was assassinated in front of the mosque. I believe around 2001 or 2002, like early on. And he was opposing Hamas getting into the government because he knew that as a resistant group, you can do both. You can do politics, you can play the games, and you can shake hands and have meetings and all the bureaucracy that follows, and be a resistance group that does things that later on you're going to be asked to condemn. And so he had that insight that later on Hamas as a movement disregarded or had this different perspectives about it, I don't know, but they later on decided to run for the government in 2006, 2007, and they did win. People did vote for Hamas, but they never had another election, ever again. That was it. And that was not because of Hamas or Fatah, that was because the system was designed to keep the West Bank and Gaza separated. So they are totally different entities, and not like here, not like north of Ireland and the rest of Ireland. It's even more, like we never see people from the West Bank. We never speak to people from the West Bank unless it's like online. When we meet in different countries. We've never been able to go back and forth. That was never a question. It will always be denied. And God forbid, if one of your family members go for treatment, let's say in Jerusalem or elsewhere, and they are on their dying bed, you need to apply for a permit that might take between 3 to 6 months to get an approval or a denial. And it often ends with denial. So if you even step a foot, and there are so many stories about moms who gave birth for specific medical purposes in Jerusalem, and they literally had to leave their babies there and were sent back to Gaza during this genocide. At this time, at this moment. So the two are kept insanely separate, really. Have you ever seen a demonstration in the West Bank in support of Gaza? It's fully run by the PA, and there is full control over the West Bank and everything that it does. But there is no Hamas in the West Bank. And the West Bank still voted for Hamas. So they were voted in. I've always felt uncomfortable around the government because I'm no friend of any government. And I think that's how journalism should be. You shouldn't be best buddies. We should be critical of them. We're the checks and balances. We literally hold them accountable. And that's what you don't see in the States at this point. Or it's fizzling away under fascism. So that even existed back during Obama and Biden. It just was more under wraps. So when I met these militants, I felt so protected because Hamas lived by principles that were ideal, were great. However, they were not always practical. And they were definitely very religious, especially Hassan. Hassan is like in a different rank over religious. Like, oh no, you go to the mosque 5 times a week. No, you have to go 5 times a day. It's just in a different, totally different universe, bubble, that only few can approach. And being there, I've often been asked, like, who told you that you can photograph this? What I would say is like, Abu Saib, Abu Mahmoud, Abu Ahmed. I mean, I don't know, just go and check. And I wasn't ever questioned twice. I wasn't hammered. I was really treated with a lot of respect. Now, we would disagree on political issues, but it was very safe to be around them. The photos are scary, of course, they are meant to be. They are literally posing in this image. But what I found fascinating is not their ethics, not their morals, not the way that they treated women or did not, how young they were. And the fact that not a single person in this photo was not an orphan by occupation. So you have a big list that Israel keeps on publishing again and again about the people who attacked on October 7th. And I will be damned if I ever condemn October 7th. October 7th was a resistance act. Was it ideal? Would I plan it that way? I don't know. No, probably not. But that was a resistance. And I will never condemn the resistance. And I will never be in a position that forces me to condemn the resistance, because if someone is putting their boot on your neck, at some point you need to push that boot, or you need to fuck off so other people can push it. And I think that's literally what they did. Hamas were willing to do the resistance when nobody else was willing to do the resistance with arms. The heartbreaking fact is that they weren't into the tragedy porn, the trauma porn. Oh, look how sad they are. All these men literally lost every single parent of theirs in 2008. They are no more than 17, 18, 19 max. And they are all orphaned by we want them to just sit and chill at a table where they can shake hands with the occupation. That will never happen. And to me, that just gave me a lot of insight to how the Al-Qassam operate. You have nothing worse than an enemy that has nothing to lose, caused by you. And so that's literally what was on our hands. Not to mention the Palestinian hostages. This photo was taken in 2006. In 2006, I was able to take a photo of Palestinian hostages. This had been going on as long as we remember. We have never called them hostages. We've all been brainwashed to call them prisoners. Of what? Most of them are not even on trial. Most of them do not have charges. What that person is, when you hold them without due process, without trial, without charges, hostage. They're just being held. And so now we're at 14,000 Palestinian hostages since the beginning, since October 7th, 2023. We're not counting any of the ones before. Among them, more than 1,000 child kids. It makes my blood boil just saying it. That we're debating, oh, well, he wasn't supposed to throw rock. You're lucky he didn't throw a Molotov. He's a child. He's 10 years old child, and you're an occupier. So who is really putting the laws? And who's the executioner? And who's the one who's supposed to implement them? Another thing that we never had, and that goes from 2008, I witnessed 2008, 2009, 2012, 2014, all these wars. I missed 2021, and I'm considered the lucky one. I missed one war, and an entire genocide. So Palestinians were never allowed to rebuild. So anytime that you want to rebuild, you need materials, any kind of materials, wood, concrete, anything really at all. So what they did eventually is that they started destroying the rubble to smash the concrete so much to turn it into materials to build with. And that takes a lot of labor when you don't have the capability, like a tractor or something huge enough to be able to destroy that faster for you. So these men worked from 3 a.m. till 10 p.m. to be able to destroy their really destroyed house with their own hands, which we see in the West Bank, in Jerusalem, a lot of it is happening. And then rebuild a room or two, because it's not going to be for big enough, and it's going to be a hazard. It's not going to be stable enough. We're going to end on a sweet story that I always like to remember. So we have a community of Bedouins. They are Palestinian Bedouins, refugee Bedouins, but they are Bedouins. They have their own lifestyle, and it's so unique, and it's so different, and it's so beautiful, but it's also so sacred and so violated by the Israeli occupation. So in this photo, I went to document that story, and that's just to say we never go fully knowing what the story we're going to document. Even as a Palestinian in Gaza, I lived all my life in Gaza. I was born in Saudi Arabia, that was a mistake, and then I fixed it and I went back to Gaza at 2 years old, and I lived there ever since. My mom is a Gazan, so she's from Gaza, and my father was a refugee. They separated, so I lived with my mother, and I was raised by my mother. And everything I knew about Gaza, I thought like I got it figured out, but there are just few things that I would like to know more. I knew nothing. It's so rich with stories. It can tell you its stories till the end of time, and you will not have enough, because it's just and the occupation and the killing and the slaughtering is 1% of those stories. It's the 1%, and it's the 99% that we know about Gaza. And it breaks my heart that most of you came to know Gaza and Palestinians when it's in such a dire shape. When the world thinks that we're poor and sad and heartbroken, but they don't know how we dance, how we eat, how we force feed, and how crazy and generous we are. It breaks my heart to see my people starve, because they starve the generous. They starve the wealthy. And I keep saying this, Gaza has the wealthiest population because they have you. They have the people of the world rallying around them while not even knowing the best of us, while not even knowing our stories. And you still give us this love that we give back. However, who has that in this world? In this cold, dark world? Who has that? We do. And no matter what happens with us, and no matter where it goes from here, we won. We absolutely won. We won the love because we only gave love. And we will always refuse to be the ones who caused and inflicted that pain on us. We will always fight viciously like you did to not be an extension of the colonizers, to not be an extension of the settlers, to not give that hate back. In this photo, I met Haj Salim, and he was, I think, 72, I might be mistaken. And when we met, I thought he's going to talk to me about, like, you know, how hard was it for him to be exiled, expelled from his hometown in Beir Saba, which is currently occupied, and how much he wants to go back. And he was not interested in that. He just kept looking at me and he was like, how do I look? Great. You look great. He's like, no. How do I look? And I kept repeating the answer and he kept repeating the questions. I felt like there's broken communication here. And eventually he pulled this purple mirror and he looked at himself and he was like, I need the merkaba. Merkaba means mirror in Bedouin slang. And he looked at himself and he said, my wife used to tell me every morning how do I look, as in describe exactly how he was dressed. Like your shmad looks a little bit to the right, to the left, you look great, your face is dry, all of these details. But she passed away, and I miss her. I have the merkaba, but it's not the same. Thank you so much. Podcaster, commentator, media critic, truth teller.
I said you not say that. He's some sort of wellness guru.
He's co-founder of Tortoise Shack and co-host of The Echo Chamber, a podcast that disrupts the state narratives in Irish media and politics. He's known for blending sharp critique with accessibility, taking apart spin, exposing hidden agendas, and pushing people to think beyond what the mainstream outlets allow. Tony is also known for his sense of solidarity, connecting local struggles for justice here in Ireland with those unfolding across the world. He uses his platform not to perform outrage, but to make space for real voices, real truth, and uncomfortable conversations. His work challenges complacency, including our own media, and reminds us that silence only serves the powerful. Tony Groves.
I'm sure this is a nightmare having to follow that. Like, so I'm really going to just apologise in advance. It is interesting. We were driving down and it was a privilege to share the car journey with you for a few hours. But we were having a laugh because a friend of mine sent me today the Soldier F trial in Derry, and so the Derry Journal had the headline of Soldier F, and the picture on it was a mural in Derry. Who's standing? It's a picture, and if you watch the person walking by, it's me. And I went, oh no!
Soldier F.
Yeah, Soldier F. Soldier F. You genuinely couldn't make it up. That happened today. This is just too bizarre. Anyway, yeah, so I've had a really bad day so far. I'm here. Well, first of all, I want to thank people who are here. It's amazing to see so many people coming out. You were right. The streets are always with Gaza. The streets are with Palestine. but it's brilliant that look, Mayo, Ballina, Fringe Festival, I never thought I'd be standing here doing this sort of thing. And one of the reasons I often do, I'm not shy to say a few words and actually try and deliver a critique, as they say, but I want to say, my late great friend, Dr. Rifat Al-Hariri, used to say, Gaza is only a story away. And that was what he always said. He wrote that in Gaza Writes Back in his introduction, Gaza is only a story away. I'm working currently on a follow-up book, doing the audiobook version with it, and it's one of the most fulfilling experiences of my life. We've had people from across the globe, from the Palestinian diaspora, read individual stories of people who are currently displaced in Gaza. And we're telling their stories with some celebrity voices, if you count Ian Cunningham as a celebrity, and I know he does. But there's many, there's people from across the world, and when the call went out, it was amazing to see the response of the diaspora and felt very much like an Irish thing as well. It was very much that sort of like, oh, do you know this person? And the most embarrassing moment was your friend Eman Mohammed. Yeah, she said, you should talk to my brother. And I'm thinking, no, I actually need a female voice for this story. She said, do you not know my brother? Do you know my brother is? Yeah. You know the Macklemore song, the Palestine song? Yeah, he's the guy who sings the whole thing. And I hadn't a clue who he was, and I said, well, in my defence, I thought Chapel Roan was a church in Cabra. So sorry. I literally felt like such a boomer. I am here to tell a few stories about how things have been told, framed, badly framed, and how we need to be more media literate in Ireland, media literate across the globe, particularly in the West. And one of the things that I will base it all about in that introduction, the one thing that I will agree with, is I tend to use my platform to get people to tell their stories and just get out of their way. So one of the podcasts I'm proud to produce is Palcast, and the full name is Palcast, One Word, One Struggle. It's hosted by Dr. Yusuf Al-Jamal, who was the executor to all of the writings of the late Rifat Al-Hariri. And again, one of the most rewarding things I've ever done. But statistically, we've done 143 episodes since October 7th. We've hosted every week someone on the ground in Gaza telling their story. Yesterday, we had a rescheduled story from a young woman called Rua, who 6 weeks earlier couldn't get a connection. She walked, which frequently we have to go to, walk long distances to get the Wi-Fi to join us on the podcast. Yesterday she joined us from Dublin, because the power of just people telling those stories on the podcast meant that a lecturer in TUD Dublin said, I can help her complete her education. And she was flown out on one of the 52 students that left, and she's restarting her career in literature, English literature, and it was just terrifying to say, wow, that's the impact of that Yusuf's work and the work that you guys all contribute to. Those small things, we don't even realise the butterfly effect of how the wings of, and then obviously Dr. Kieran Carroll, I want to shout him out in TUD, just reached out and said, we can help. And now, that's one of several stories. But Rua's in Dublin now. We wish she didn't have to be. And I think we want to share that. But I want to then touch specifically on one conflagration which got me in lots of trouble with Irish media recently. And it was the double tap attack on the journalists that Israel says. And it was framed by the Western media immediately as Israel says that there was a Hamas camera, if you recall. I didn't realise at the time, sadly, that Salman Hiji is a brilliant photojournalist in Gaza as well. I interviewed him and two of the journalists that were killed, and then it was later on when the names came out. But what's really crucial is how Irish media framed this. Was Israel says was the opening phrase on Virgin Media News by a journalist who I have great regard and great respect for, Gavin Riley. And I say that truly, I know Gavin a long time, I hold him in the highest regard, but at some level he must know that that's not how you don't ask, and what I said directly was you don't go to attend a fire and say, the arsonist says, right? And we began from that point when things evolved, because it was so easy to pick it apart. Israel said one of the people who was killed was Hamas. That's true. There was a Hamas person killed. The body was brought to the hospital 4 days earlier. He was already dead. But it went out on, repeated on Virgin Media, repeated on RTE, repeated on News Talk, repeated on Today FM. Within hours, and by the time the correction goes around, you know the expressions. You know, the light goes around the world while the truth is getting its shoes on. So that is the reality of the situation. That is just one example of the dozens I can think of that have led us into this situation whereby, in the last while, they had dropped the other. The Hamas, 20,000 are dead according to the Hamas Ministry of Health. And they decided to use the kindness of dropping that for the most part lately, but it took them 2 years to get to this point. How many children was enough dead children? How many people had to suffer? How many journalists? And this is where I get very upset, and I know you're going to take the microphone off me, but I get so upset about the journalists I've spoken to in Gaza, because all of the Western journalists say, well, if they opened up and let us in, we'd see what's going on.
Jesus Christ.
I'm like, guys, this is the most Orientalist thing you can see. You're saying that, look, again, back to Rifat. Early in the genocide, 4 journalists were killed in the first few weeks. And I was interviewing Rifat on the podcast, and I asked him, did he know any of the journalists? And he said, yes, I knew Rushdie Sarge, who had Iron Media, which was, he was targeted simply because he was using a drone to record the damages. The strikes were happening. There was nothing. Rushdie was just a brave young man. Little did I know how brave he was until a year later I interviewed his wife, who took over his job. They had one daughter, an infant at the time that Rushdie was killed, and she went to work to take up his legacy. And when she was there, this is telling myself a little bit. I didn't make the connection. And I asked her about her husband, and then she told me the story of how there had been shelling had commenced on the street that they were in, and they decided to leave. They came down the stairs of the house with Rushdie's brothers, and she had the baby on her chest, and they heard the shell fall. And she thought we'd get out into the street, and then she felt something on her legs. But the dust is so bad, everything's so bad, what's going on? Can't, you know, they call it the taste of blood in your mouth, the after the bomb effect. And she realised that what Rushdie had done, she had her hand on his shoulders, he had done this with Schumacher. And the piece of shrapnel pierced his brain right to his skull. And then, as if by some sort of chaotic moment, while we're recording, you can hear the carpet humming. And she took her phone out, and I said, you need to go. And she said, no, I'm just texting to make sure my daughter is not towards where the carpet bombing is, we can continue. And I will then take all of that and bring it to Irish journalism directly and say, every time I've done these things, I've reached out to editors, producers, writers, and I said to them, you need to speak to these people, not to this man in Tel Aviv, not to this person who's giving you the Reuters wire feed that you're taking, not to this person in the AP who's giving you the wire feed. I can think of one Irish media outlet who allowed a journalist that I know write a weekly piece for them under a pseudonym, which was actually really generous in that regard because journalists are painting a target on themselves. I can tell you for a fact, RTE walked away, Virgin Media, their producer did not want to know, and like Bar Media has just been a disaster in many ways, up until the last few months as they're starting to go, we have to stop this. We now have NUJ that's been dragged kicking and screaming into a position where they stand at the spire and they read the names of 254 journalists who they don't know. But they didn't put in their newspapers, they didn't put on their radios, they didn't have on their TVs. And if I could do it from a tiny room on Ballina Road, how they can't do it is beyond me. So I really have to stress to people, our sources, alternative media can be toxic. social media is awful. But it's not all awful, it's not all dreadful. There are people doing brilliant work, and there are also some brave Irish journalists who've spoken out. But many of them, it's so difficult. Like, I'm going to name one person who gives great credit, because I mentioned him earlier. We were talking. Niall Sargent from The Currency is a tiny fringe publication that writes about share prices in the tech industry, what's happening in corporate. He writes week after week after week after week after Gaza. And I don't know how he gets The Currency to run it, because it's not their audience, it's not their thing, but he does it all the time. But isn't it funny how quickly they can give you an exception? Yeah. And that's not good, that's not healthy. And, you know, there's been research done. We've seen the 47 times more reports on deaths in Israel too, deaths in Palestine, and that's just on the BBC. If we think RT is immune, we're absolutely insane to believe it. But I suppose, I need to talk about, you said about the boot on your neck and the resistance. In Ireland, what we use is what I like to call the cult of civility. We use it so powerfully in a way to still the dissent. Someone like me is considered a radical because I then say, well, that's actually, I'm fact-checking what's happening here. That's not nice, Tom. They were doing their job. They're just doing their job. They're just doing their job. You know, when you challenge the narrative and you actually do it in a robust and abrasive way, you will find yourself ostracised. I mean, I had 90 seconds on RT once and I actually don't blame him for that. I think RT, I was invited in by RT specifically for a hit piece on Sinn Féin. And if there's any aspiring people going to listen to this about journalism, the secret going into RT is say, yeah, I'll go along with that, and then do what you then say whatever the hell you want. That's it, that's not it. So when they came in, if anybody recalls the show, there was Eddie Hobbs and they're all sitting around and they went, Tommy, what are you here for? Were we done the pre-rehearsal? Trevor? And I was, Sinn Féin. And I'm like, well, I'm actually here because Jennifer Carmichael was saying absolute nonsense about the living wage. Michael Flynn is talking about development profits, and we've got the highest subsidised housing units in the EU. And then Eddie Hobbs is giving out about the left as if we live in a communist republic, and I wish we did, Eddie. And then poor Matt Carthy from Sinn Féin is grinning. And I went, don't get me started with Jim Matt. And then we go to Martin Ward, the traveller comedian. He's sitting opposite me going, what? And I never got a call again. But it is back to that cult of civility. It really is. We shouldn't be afraid to speak plainly, especially when we're speaking plainly to people who make decisions about how we live our lives, whether it be housing, whether it be how we progress. Sinead Gibney, I rarely give politicians a lot of credit on all sides, but Sinead Gibney made a really good point in the debate on the flotilla families, which I was invited into, where she said no other country in the world does the government have a mandate as powerful from the public to do more for Gaza, to actually take those steps. Because whatever they would do, the public said, yeah, we support you. We're going to back you on that. And yet they continually use verbal gymnastics, as you said earlier, to say, we're deeply concerned about our family members who were detained. And it's like, you know, Barry Heenan, I interviewed him last night, hours before he was detained, an Irish TD, independent TD. Should never vote against the Occupied Territories Bill, Barry, and I will never forgive it to you, but he's on the boat, he has to get credit, he stepped up, he took the punishment, and he's now in an Israeli jail. He said he was a hostage. No one else did. Michael Martin didn't. Simon Harris didn't. He said he was a hostage, and you're going, he's your colleague. And I don't understand him when I submitted something recently for another colleague, and where I used the phrase about the rise in fascism, and how, particularly when it pertains to the United States, the phrase that was used was, America has gone from not to hungry in 6.4 Orbans. I thought it was a zinger. The Irish Times took it out. The piece went in, but the Irish Times took that line out, and I was so angry. But my point is, we don't teach media literacy. We don't really, we accept it. Like, we just sat and we listened to Ciara Kelly say, what about October 7th? 3 times or something. 3 times. We heard Pat Kenny talk about it repeatedly. We heard Joe Duffy talk about it over and over. And this is not to pin it all on them. It has to be coming from the editorial decision. That's where they take their direction from. And even if you're not, you're going to self-censor. And it's a huge issue in Ireland that people will self-censor because they know what gets published and what doesn't. They'll say, if I actually do frame it in such a way, it's much less likely. And then they'll say to me afterwards, but it's not better that I got to report in. I mean, well, that's if you can sleep at night like that, yeah. And that is particularly relevant when it comes to Gaza, because behind each one of those 10 children who were killed, or 4 people who were killed today, or, you know, there was, Israel says that there was a Hamas terror cell present when the building came down and killed 16 people. I was very fortunate many years ago to get to work with an organisation called We Are Not Numbers in Gaza, and each one of those people is not a number, they're a story. Gaza is only ever a story away, and the most important thing is we, as people who are supposed to be working as journalists, broadcasters, writers, academics, you're supposed to tell the story, or let them use their voice to tell it. And the final thing I'll do about this is we really need to challenge our own logic on this, who we want to hear telling us that message. We have been privileged this evening to sit there and listen to Eman tell her story and her story of her experiences. I have had the privilege of interviewing medics in Gaza who gave orders to visiting medics from the West. And every time BBC want to do a story or RT want to do a story, they want the person who looks like me and not the guy who actually, like, there's one trauma surgeon who's done all of Irish media who took his orders from a brilliant doctor called Khalid Sayer, who was top of his class at Harvard Medical. And when he told me we were talking, he said, you know Khalid? And I went, yeah, I know Khalid, he's brilliant. He goes, no, Tony, he literally walks in, and this is how brilliant it is. After there's been another escalation, another bomb, another carpet bombing, Khalid will walk in and he will traffic light the area and say, green to be safe, orange is going to be more difficult, red, we're going to have to give up and we have to make the decisions. And then everybody takes their lead from him. I sat and spoke to that man for 2 hours. I've spoken to him since, and not once did an Irish media outlet reach out and say, actually, can we talk to him? Wow. But and this is not a knock on the medics that are, you know, they're coming back from Australia and they're telling their stories. But pass the mic, get out of the way, and let the Palestinian people tell their stories, because that is the only way that we will actually be genuine allies. Because like right now I'm hogging the stage, and I feel deeply uncomfortable knowing that there should be Abu Bakr al-Ed should be telling his story. You know, he is definitely, you won't mind me saying, someone who's suffering from a lot of trauma from what he's endured. Yesterday was an incredibly difficult day for people from Gaza, looking at 2 years into a genocide. And we then will still have to put up with this nonsense to end. As Rifat would say, you don't take a backward step. He would not take a backward step. But think about what's happened in the background. When he was killed, you might remember, obviously, the poem went viral, If I Must Die, You Must Live. And you saw the picture of the kites earlier, and there was that was the pun in that poem was Let It Be the tale of the kite. But he wrote that poem 10 years before he was killed. It just went viral. It went viral afterwards. But he was the person who said, literally, if I'm killed, I'm being targeted by Zionist media in the US. And he said, word for word, Barry Weiss is going to be painted a target on me. Our gratitude for Eman, our gratitude for each other, because we all do it with one another. I find it very hard. This last 2 years has been very difficult, and it's not a fraction of what people, my friends in Gaza, go through on a daily basis. And my friends who've left Gaza. And I expressed the guilt I have of getting people out, because it's worked really hard to get people out. And then you say, oh, well, then I think our job done, but job was never done. We have to keep going. And if I could bring it back to Derry. I'm going to bring it back to Derry, and I'm trying and promise to be one last little kind of anecdote about Rifat. For years, when we were talking, people were terrified of Rifat in Gaza, especially students, because he was exceptionally difficult on them on their assignments. They had to work really hard, really diligently, but people queued up to get into his classes. And when I first spoke to him, he was the same. He was snappy. And I think I said something as politely as, "Fuck off, I'm not one of your students." He got on like a house on fire. Like literally every cheeky comment. I was sitting in the Gravediggers pub in Glasgow, and I took a picture of a pint of Guinness with a dog sitting beside me. I said, this one's for you. He said, "What about the other 4 you had?" But the joke he used to play on me for the longest time was, Tony, he would introduce me to people as Tony, his second favourite Irishman. This was for years. And I was really annoyed because in my head, I thought it was that Cork fake Canadian type hickey. And I said, what have I got to do? I mean, I'm doing everything I can. And 2 weeks before he was murdered, he said, "Tony, I want to let you know, the best Irishman is actually Bobby Sands." I said, "I don't want to compete with him!" We'll leave it there. Thank you.
Situation, and that takes some time. Next I'm going to introduce Audrey Kissane, who's a journalist, media reform campaigner and deep thinker about power, narrative and justice. She has contributed to national and regional outlets across Ireland and has become known for her bold critical essays dissecting media complicity in global crises. Her work grapples with the tough truths, how newsrooms filter stories, which injustice gets airtime, which power remains unchallenged. Her analysis of Irish press coverage of Palestine is among the clearest and most uncompromising. She's not a protector of the status quo. She's someone who pushes institutions to live up to their acclaimed values. And her voice tonight will help us not just see how the media fails, but how we might reclaim the narrative power. Audrey Kissane.
A little few words of Irish. That's my new little resolution to try and add a cúpla focal every time I speak. And I think at the heart of that, and just to both of you guys, thank you so much. It is such an honour to be beside you both speaking tonight. You're both huge inspirations. And as you were talking, and you said, you know, it isn't our job to free Palestine. We're not going to do that. We have to free ourselves to be real allies. And that has been at the heart of what I have sought to do, is understand what the hell is going on in this country and how colonised our minds still are. And the realisation of that through a heinously biased narrative in favour of the IDF, which is incomprehensible in a country that we sing songs in the pubs about "go on home, British soldier, go on home." We are so proud of our ancestors who fought and took up arms to get the British out. And here we are, centering an Israeli narrative, and it makes no sense in a country where the overwhelming amount of people are in support of Palestine. So that's what I try to get to the bottom of, and that's what systems are in place, what patterns are in place, and to try and get us to kind of take a helicopter view, to look down at it and just really try to figure out what is going on and why is this happening the way this is happening. I've done different kinds of analysis on the media, and you've both touched on them, where the headlines are horrendous. There's no perpetrator. Things just happen. There's no historical context, like in case you might make sense of a world event, it just happens out of the blue and it's incomprehensible because we're not going to arm the reader with any background context that might actually humanise people that the narrative is designed to dehumanise. But what I wanted to do is I prepared something, and I suppose in some ways it's a little bit philosophical, but just to get us thinking about why our media is the way it is, and what we should, I suppose, look out for when we're reading it. So I'll just go ahead and read it as I've written it. There was a line I read a few weeks ago that stopped me, and it was simple. It was just, if you knew my story, you would stand with me and not against me. And I just thought how it really captured how humans, when we're inclined to fear and even hate things that we don't know or that we don't fully understand. But the opposite of that is also true, which is that knowing and hearing and understanding people's stories leads to empathy instead of fear, and at the very least, some kind of an element of comprehension. So surely, with that logic, the more stories we hear and know, the better it is for us, even if it's just to understand the incomprehensible. So you'd wonder then why we're not allowed to hear some stories, and who gets to decide what we are and we are not allowed to hear, and should anyone have that authority over us and our minds and the way we make sense of the world. We censor some bad guys, but not all of them. So there's an entire industry. People are fascinated about true crime. They can't get enough of it. Fascinated listening to serial killers sit down and talk. And there's never a fear that we're going to give legitimacy to a serial killer by hearing the story. People just want to understand the incomprehensible. And hearing the story of that, it doesn't induce sympathy, it exposes them for what they are. So why don't we apply that logic to so-called terrorist groups? Why don't we listen to them tell their stories? Why can't we observe what makes them tick? Surely, if they're right about them being terrorists, that hearing them speak will only confirm our horror for them, as it does when we listen to serial killers. Or would it? Is there a fear that by hearing the stories of freedom fighters, audiences wouldn't actually be horrified? They might even understand their cause. If you knew my story, you would stand with me and not against me. One way to spot RTE propaganda is by noticing just how smoothly the Israeli narrative cuts through its news reports. Israeli newspapers like Haaretz and the Times of Israel, they actually put up more resistance to the line than simply printing it unchecked, which is very hard to understand. And people often wonder, why would Ireland's state broadcaster be biased in favour of the Israeli narrative, more so than the Israeli press, even as we can see it for ourselves anyway on our phones? RT's commitment to leading its reports with the Israeli accounts of events is stubborn, and it barely wavers, despite a torrent of daily evidence of Israel's war crimes live streamed from Palestine. And all complaints, and there have been many, and there has been much research and so much time and effort has gone into measuring, proving, and proving in such a comprehensive way just how biased and imbalanced and impartial it is. Not impartial, should I say. And all of the complaints are just rejected, dismissed, ignored. Sometimes you get the odd passive-aggressive reply. How dare you? Who do you think you are? And just a complete and utter denial, which is crazy. So, and that's all happening despite the parallels between Ireland and Palestine and the overwhelming public support. I just thought to try something the other day, which was to type the keywords Hannibal Directive on RT News, and there's zero results for the Hannibal Directive. I don't know if everyone here is familiar with it, but it's probably most of you are. The policy, I think it was first developed in the 80s, or implemented, should I say, where Israel kills its own civilians or soldiers if there's a threat that they'll be taken hostage. So here's RT with absolutely no context there. We know now, and the evidence proves, that Israel did employ the Hannibal Directive on October 7th and did indeed kill its own citizens. But if you look for the evidence of that in RT, you'll find absolutely nothing. And if you look, this is just another, I said, let's see just how many times they've mentioned Hamas. I just wanted to measure that. And as you can see, it's well over 20,000. It'd take more than 55 years to mention Hamas once a day at that rate. So they love that, but there's no mention at all of the Hannibal Directive. And just to contrast it with the Israeli media, Haaretz, IDF ordered Hannibal Directive to prevent Hamas taking soldiers captive. And the Times of Israel has the report as well. And what's interesting here about the investigation is just how widely reported they are in the Israeli media. And in this image here, it's actually kibbutz Be'eri. Haaretz reported that an Israeli tank fired 2 shells into a house that was holding over a dozen Israeli captives. Of the 14 held there, 13 were killed. So Israel shelled the house with its own civilians inside rather than the threat of them being hostages. And incidentally, that very same kibbutz is where Micheál Martin visited, that now infamous picture pointing to the ceiling. Like, seriously, and not a word about that. Just Micheál Martin is very passionate and full of conviction when it comes to condemning the resistance, but when it comes to condemning state-enacted violence, that's absent, and instead they're legitimate business partners. And that is an undeniable pattern with Micheál Martin. So why doesn't RT report these news stories? Why is Ireland more loyal to upholding the Israeli military narrative than even the Israeli media is? It makes no sense. And I've thought a lot about this, and it's just a view, it's my opinion, that propaganda is actually most necessary where there's the threat that the audience is likely to sympathise with the wrong party. We saw this in Ireland ourselves during the Troubles. Section 31 of the Broadcasting Act 1960, the ban on IRA spokespeople, which was extended to include Sinn Féin spokespeople, which was extended to include Sinn Féin members. There were some, standout incidents in the 70s. The journalist Kevin O'Kelly, who was briefly jailed after he had interviewed the IRA chief of staff and refused to identify his voice in the tape. And after that, the censorship was ramped up. But what really, when you study that period, stands out is that the British press wasn't as strict as the Irish press were. They actually did interview Sinn Féin politicians about constituency business and in the lead up to elections. They dubbed the voices and they were lampooned with satire for doing as much. But they did. They were actually, their media was actually more liberal in that regard. RTE had a policy of complete and total censorship. You couldn't even report on a privately held interview and talk about that. It was a complete ban. And some things, reading back on it, that just really bring home the insanity of it. A Sinn Féin member calling into a radio show about gardening, and that had to be put to a stop because, oh my God, a Sinn Féin member is here talking about gardening. Insane. So, yeah, and it ended with the case of Larry O'Toole. He was on strike at the Gatto cake factory in Findus, and he couldn't speak to RTE. and RT told him as such in writing that he was censored because he was a Sinn Féin member. He brought them to court, the High Court, and he won. RT appealed, even though it liberalised the censorship that there was imposed upon them. So RTE fought to uphold censorship, and RT lost the appeal and the loss of its credibility. So Section 31, it was eventually ended in 1994 by none other than, I think we will unanimously love Michael D, who was then Minister for Arts, Culture and the Gaeltacht. He didn't trigger it. So when we look at the extent of it, and we look how total it was, and we've just compared Israeli media and found it more liberal, or found it more free than the Irish, and the same with the British press during the Troubles. What is the fear? What is it? Is it why we censor Hamas and not serial killers? The word Hamas will go down in history as the word that was used to greenlight a Holocaust on an entire people. I believe that future analysts and historians will study how it was possible for the world to dehumanize Palestinians and justify atrocities just with one word, Hamas. Hospitals have been obliterated under the guise of them being a Hamas command and control centre. The evidence isn't needed, just the word Hamas. And empathy disappears. A lot of investment has gone into that word to associate it with the worst evil in the world, worse somehow than the genocide Israel is committing. Journalists have been slaughtered with one word, Hamas. Children will grow up to be Hamas, the Israelis say, so they kill them. And it's the story of every genocide, that dehumanization. Nothing justifies October 7th, they tell us, but October 7th justifies everything. With just one word, Hamas. Do you condemn Hamas? By answering in the affirmative, most people think that they've passed a moral litmus test. But the reality is that it equates to the belief that Palestinians do not have a right to resist genocide. Not only does it mean you condemn resistance against genocide, but the apartheid and ethnic cleansing that has been happening since at least 1948. Israel can't forcibly take Palestinian land without dispossessing and slaughtering the indigenous population. It's not possible. Are people supposed to hand over their keys? Is that what they should do? The right to resist occupation is enshrined in international law. You will never get that context on RTE News. Never. But for some reason, that right doesn't apply to Palestinians. But you know who does think it's natural for Palestinians to resist? The former director of Shin Bet, the Israeli security agency. He was asked in an interview, if you were a Palestinian living in the West Bank or Gaza, what would your view be of Israel? I would fight against Israel to achieve my liberty, he said. How would you fight? How dirty, he was asked. I would do everything in order to achieve my liberty, and that is it. But in Ireland, our politicians don't feel the same. Our state broadcaster can't even conceive or even discuss Palestinian resistance. They remain more loyal to the Israeli narrative than even Israeli media. It was the same during the Troubles, with the British press being more liberal. You see, there's a real risk in Ireland that if people knew the story of those they're taught to fear and hate, they might recognise their cause instead. In Ireland, There is a political fear of that, and that fear tends to trickle into our state media and the narrative it upholds. When Taoiseach Micheál Martin visited Netanyahu in September 2023, just weeks before October 7th, he said, "Calling Israel an apartheid state doesn't add a whole lot to the peace process." He denied what was right before his eyes, and in doing that, he denied the oppression of Palestinian people. The year up to that point had been the deadliest year on record for children in Palestine, and especially the West Bank. He referred to the troubles on Virgin Media in 2024 as a war imposed by the Provisional IRA. When challenged by Colette Fitzpatrick on Virgin Media about it being a war, she said, "Surely a war on both sides." He said, "I'd be careful of saying both sides. I'd be careful of saying both sides." He then quoted a report from PSNI chief John Boucher saying he nailed it when he said the IRA campaign was a war on its own people. Yeah, he said that to the nation, and he still fucking got elected. So that'll tell you about how colonised we really still are. What he didn't quote was a report by the Norwegian Centre for Human Rights, published a few months before he did that interview, which reported that the majority of victims of British state violence were civilians. Over 70% were undisputedly unarmed at the time of their deaths, and the victims were disproportionately Catholic. But there were no two sides. Several patterns emerged from the data examined by that panel, but this part really stood out, and it's relevant to today's topic. It appears that questionable policies and practices used by the state during the conflict were later exported, directly or indirectly, to places such as Iraq or Afghanistan in relation to the war on terror. The absence of effective inquiries into such policies and practices contributed to the ease in which they have spread globally. The media and politicians don't like to focus on the horrors committed by state actors. We focus on the resistance of oppressed and colonised people. The media has a selective morality and humanises the victims on one side only. RT's track record of doing this when reporting on Palestine is well established. We've counted it, we've measured it, and the results are irrefutable to anyone who respects data. Aisling Kimpos for Palestine has done an excellent and comprehensive research piece, and I would recommend you all look at it, because there's two different studies where she looks at two different topics. The first one is about topics such as dehumanization, and this is just one small piece from it. I think this is the next slide, I can read it. So she basically took all of the articles RTE had written about hostages, and I'm going to call the Palestinians hostages as well as the Israeli hostages, even though the media doesn't do that. And she measured, in articles where both Palestinian and Israeli hostages were released on the same day, in those articles, how many times the Palestinian hostages were named, given a name, or someone known to that person, a loved one, spoke about them and told about their story. And the results are not surprising. In 18% of articles, Palestinians were named. In 82%, Israelis were, and had someone from the family talk about them, because the Israeli people have multiple dimensions. They have families, they have jobs, they have ages, they have names, whereas Palestinians are numbers in their reports. So in the end, it's justice to finish to think about that really simple line: if you knew my story, you would stand against me and not with me. And is that why we can't hear the name of Palestinian children held hostage in Israeli torture camps? Is it ever okay for the state or the media to decide for you whose story you get to hear and whose story you don't get to hear? Always ask why you're hearing some stories and not others, if you really truly want to understand the world around you. Saoirse Dublin, Palestine, Free Palestine.
Our three amazing speakers tonight. You've been fantastic. We have them.
Thank you for great presentations. Very enjoyed reading them. Sad topic. Eman mentioned Irish America, and it brought to mind Martin Luther King, who grew up in the South. He said he thought he knew discrimination and racism, but until he went into the suburbs of Chicago, and you know who he met there, Irish Americans. And I just wanted to ask, how did we become so lobotomized as a people? When the people I meet every day, it's like Hamas, they lick the propaganda off the streets, for want of a better way of putting it. You know, how, I suppose, for Tony and Audrey, I'd ask that question.
Well, I speak to several journalists in the US, and they've been telling me about this rise of it becoming more and more systemic and how it's become more comfortable. One of the lines John Schwartz always uses is, "Thank God we're all too fat to fight," because it's getting out of hand. And I know. Look, but when he talks about the Irish American experience, he talks about it through the prism of, and we had this conversation earlier about the dehumanization process. We were talking about, you know, the moment you create an out-group, you automatically create an in-group. And once you have an in-group, you can do things that dehumanize the out-group. And the Irish people participated in that, whether it be on the Trail of Tears, whether it be to where we went wrong. So the only thing I can say though is that when we do try and we live in tents and camps, like in terms of like our politics, and we're always like, he's in that camp, they're in that camp. They're in a much bigger tent village, and we're not reaching them, and that's one of the reasons. Like we talk about America as this. Well, if Kamala got elected, it would have been different. I think the only thing that would have been different is civility. They would have done things in a politer way, and decorum would have been different. Greg Stoker said it, decorum, that the US veteran said it recently, and it really worries me because actually Greg's a really interesting example. If anybody's familiar with it, he was taken on the flotilla, the US veterans boat. He is descendant from Bram Stoker. You know, we were in Dublin, but one joke Will tells, he said, well, that's very strange because Bram famously liked boys. But nonetheless, he talks about that as a way of saying he actually goes and he finds those Irish Americans are easier to, as Audrey explained, when you have the conversation with them, rather than patronise and rather than condescend, which people like me on the left who I've read the arguments, I've read my Marx and all the rest of it, I'm so pure on theory. They just don't care. Whereas if I talk to them like Greg does, and that's his skill, he's such a great communicator, they actually are much more likely to come to your side. And some of us have written them off, and I know I've been guilty of that, so I'm trying to think, can we stop writing people off, and can we try to reach out, even if it's not going to work all the time, we just need to refine it, we can't give up. Just like we can't give up on international law, we can't give up on 49% or 51% of Irish America, or whatever the percentages are. What do you think?
Yeah. the way I understood it as well, like when you use the word lobotomized, it really like struck me because it doesn't make sense for people with our history to be talking and condemning Hamas and resistance when we will go and we will, like I said earlier, we will sit in a pub and we will sing our rebel songs and pound our chests and think we're great because our men drove the Brits out with their guns. And it doesn't make any sense. And the parallels between our history, when you think of Arthur Balfour, the Chief Secretary of Ireland, he cut his teeth in Ireland, evicting people from the land, and a crazy cruelty that he exported to Palestine. We know viscerally, like our ancestors went through a Palestine much worse, but those parallels they're so. I really struggle to understand how that happens, and for me, I try to kind of think of it in the ways that I think our politics never really was liberated fully. I recently, like Tony, you're saying that your theory is really great. I'm only playing catch up here, and I was reading a book by Conor McCabe. Sins of the Father and the decisions that shaped the Irish economy, and I learned about the Irish comprador for the first time, and it blew my mind. I read a paragraph and I actually stared at the wall for half an hour, and it all just goes click, 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 which was that, during the genocide, the land was cleared for cattle because Britain wanted Ireland to be used as a giant field for cattle so that beef could be exported to Britain. So none of these small holdings were any good, so the land was cleared, families were evicted, families were starving to death. It was merciless. And these big ranches, cattle ranches, graziers they were called, took their place. And the paragraph that I read that made it kind of click was that after the decline in power of the landlord class, the large estates stayed large, and who took them but the wealthiest farmers. And those were the people that went on to lead the Free State from the 20s to right up to the 60s, the author said. And they controlled the levers, Simon's levers of power, and the media, and all facets of Irish society.
Yeah, that's exactly it. I mean, that is the why.
That's why?
That's the core of the problem. Like,
yeah.
We're getting to the why there.
Yeah.
Like, we know the how. We know what they're doing. We know how they're doing it, how it's spoon-fed. But that is the why.
Yes. Yeah, and that's so important, and the why is always the most important, because especially when things aren't adding up. Why are we behaving like, I couldn't use a better word, like we're lobotomized? Like, it doesn't make sense, and it's because we're highly conditioned by the repetitive media that tells us, like, how many people have the balls to say on RTE, I do not condemn Hamas, and I recognise the right of the Palestinians to resist, just as in my case I can say my great-grandfather resisted the British occupation. I support it in the same way that I support my great-grandfather doing it. No one does it. There's just this, I don't know, it is cowardice, but it goes deeper. There's kind of a feeling that I'll be ostracised. There aren't enough people in agreement with me, or people will think I'm violent. No one wants to be violent. Our ancestors would love to have just lived happily, of course, on their land and never had to pick up a weapon in their life. But when you bring violence and you steal, of course, you're going to resist that. But I think we have to try, get a little bit braver, saying it out loud, because it's totally taboo still.
We don't get to say, if you ring the radio, they have you screamed.
They do. That's true. That's true as well. Do what
Yeah. Well, I think they have 3 seconds. Do they not have 3 seconds when you're lying that they can cut you off?
Personally, I think it's that we've been conditioned. I mean, for the last 20 years, you never hear Gaza been mentioned unless the word Hamas controlled is inside. Right? Like, I'll give you three sentences. The three of them are three different stories. Right? So, rockets fired towards Israel from Hamas-held territories. Rockets hitting Israel fired by Hamas. Rockets fired from Hamas-held territories hit Israel. Now, there are three completely different stories, but they've got the word Hamas in there every time, and that's since 2008. It means the first one is rockets fired from Hamas-held territories towards Israel. It means they fell short, and it was more than likely the PIJ or Ali Mustafa. The second one then is the rockets were fired by Hamas and they did hit Israel. And the third one is, once again, they weren't fired by Hamas, but they did hit Israel. And this has been perpetrated for the last basically 20 years. All we hear continuously is Hamas controlled Gaza. Hamas never controlled Gaza. You cannot turn around and say Hamas controlled Gaza. We'll take Ireland, for example. If Britain controlled our airspace, Britain controlled our territorial waters, Britain controlled our borders, Britain controlled how much food we were allowed to get in, how much medical supplies was allowed to get in, how many hours of electricity we could get per day, how much medical supplies we could get per day, who was allowed in and out of the country and when they were allowed in and out of the country and for how long, and then to top it all then, who collects the taxes and distributes the taxes. If that was Ireland, we wouldn't say the Irish government were in control. We would call that, and we did, we called it home rule. Yeah. We had basically a group sitting and making, you can fill in a pothole here and you can turn on the light there, and that's about it. So we have been told continuously that it's Hamas controlled, Hamas this, Hamas that. And to your point there about October 7th, the Palestinians have tried everything. So the question you need to ask is, what would you have done? The Palestinians, since 2006, have turned around and said, we go down the political road. And they tried to go to the UN continuously. And every time they went to the UN, there was a veto by America. They said, we'll go down the legal road. They went to the ICC and the ICJ, and Prosecutor Khan, his entire family were threatened by the Israelis with death. So that case was dropped. They then decided we'll go down the boycott route. 38 states in America had made it illegal for you to boycott Israel. So they've tried to get rid of the boycott movement. Then the Palestinians said, we'll do the peaceful march. And they had the right return march, they walked to the fence. 223 of them were shot dead. 1,600 were wounded. This includes medics, paramedics, doctors, journalists, and ordinary civilians. So they've gone down legal, political, peaceful, and civil disobedience. What was left to them at that stage? And so that's why October 7th happened. Because if you're sitting there and you're told you're allowed to get 2,600 calories per day, because that's what the Israelis allow in, and your child is dying, but you're not getting any medication, yes, eventually you will hit back, and that's what the Palestinians have done.
Audrey, I suppose I lived in Northern Ireland for 30 years, so I know, and I'm originally from the south. My first experience of my father showing me a newspaper, I was in Casement Park the last time the GAA played a football match there, and the Brits basically kept coming down with the buzzers with helicopters, and people started shouting and throwing things. The next day, the Irish media and the British media both reported that rioting, and my father showed me the Irish Press and the Irish Times and the Irish Independent. He said, you were there. Now, so this thing about our media, and you hark back to the right of resistance of your great-grandfather, but you don't talk about it. The reason RTE is like it is, and the reason the Irish media is like it is, they don't talk about it. It's like my granny used to talk about, there was the IRA in the old days were gentlemen.
Good IRA, bad IRA.
Yes. So it's the same shit, you know what I mean, just a different decade.
I walked the streets of Belfast a few months ago with Danny Morrison,
who was Sinn Féin's spokesperson. Really accidental. But we walked the streets and he talked about, you know, you're walking going, well, that's where such and such was shot by a rubber bullet, that's where they actually tried to kill me, that's where he spoke. But what was really interesting is how they did it, is they took the battle to the courts as well. So, you know, Danny's house was paid for by BBC because they defamed him. Another large settlement was because, and this is true, they decided to really weaponise the state back against the state that was being used. One of the famous ones where they successfully sued RTE is when Philip Boucher Hayes was interviewing someone, and someone alluded said that Danny Morrison had someone taken and then ordered to carry out an execution. And Danny Morrison rang the solicitor and said, we're going to take RTE to the cleaners. He goes, well, I mean, what proof have you got? Because I was in prison when that happened, so I couldn't have done it. He was already locked up for talking nonsense. But so, you know, they did take it back, but it took all of those. Even now, Jerry Adams won this case against the BBC recently. So the issue with RTE is, as Audrey said, is if you take your complaint to the fullest extent with RTE, you will get snarky and sneery replies from journalists who wrote the piece will come back to you and be snarky. And then they'll say, well, by the way, it's part of our RTE online, so it's not covered by the Broadcasting Authority. So you can't actually go to the regulator. There's no third party that's going to adjudicate over it. And you just literally hit a block. So I'll give you one real example. Back when Eman Mohammed was the Minister for Housing, he launched his housing policy, and then John Kilrain from RTE published a piece said that the government, despite rising homelessness, has hit all of its housing targets. And that wasn't true. They hadn't hit any of them. But what they had done is they changed it. So they said over the course of 5 years we're going to build 120,000 homes at 30,000 in year 1, 32, you know. But 6 months in, so shit, I'm going to do this. So they actually changed the pillars of rebuilding Ireland. And when I sent the whole thing to John Kilrain, he says, yeah, but we're not taking it down because basically you told me you were a prick. And it might be right, I am. But it just shows the article is still online today, to this day. And when I went all the way through to the complaints process, they said, our online is not covered, so you can't actually take it to the Broadcasting Authority of Ireland. And that is my own lived experience with RTE when it came to something that's factually incorrect, that's still online, and we wonder why we have 6,000 homeless children, because there's a level of complicity there.
Thank you, Tony. I think we're getting close to the end now. I know everybody's anxious to start moving away, so there's one last question, and then we finish up.
Hi, sorry, it's not a question, it's just thank you so much, especially Eman, for your story. It was probably the first time listening to somebody whose story is so close to what's going on in Gaza. And I think what you said about the focus being on the goodies and the baddies, you have to be, the oppressed person has to be the good version of the oppressed person, of the oppressed person. You can't be an alcoholic suffering person. You can't be a criminal suffering person. You have to be the perfect version, whereas the person with the boot on your neck can be anything they want to be because it's necessary for their cause. I really appreciated hearing that, and it's just, yeah, thank you so much.
Closing really so appropriate, and just one final time to thank you all first of all for coming out and for supporting us and for just keeping the fight. And I think there's a lot of honesty spoken tonight that we don't often hear. And a very, very, very special thank you to Audrey, to Tony and to Eman for all of your wisdom and time and effort. I think we really deserve it.